Ritual, Power, Healing, and Community by Malidoma Patrice Same. The Farewell. The stirring of the baobab tree called me from my sleep. Even though it was not close by, it sounded as if it were. There seemed to be a strange ether in the air. Even though I was only 5 years old, I knew that something was amiss. Something was different. As I sleepily sauntered from father's house, I noticed Gisso sitting close to the door. He spoke to me. This will be a special day, Malidoma. Gisso never spoke to me. He would be most friendly to me. He would always look at me as if we were silent friends. He would even walk with me and grandfather at times, but he never spoke to me. Gisso, why are you here? What is happening? The curiosity was stirring me from my sleepiness. You are to go to your grandfather's quarters, Malidoma. You are to speak with your brother. My brother. How did Gisso know that grandfather was my brother? Where is my father? Father usually made sure that I was taken care of before I would begin my day with grandfather. Your father is not here. He has gone to see the white priest on the hill. Why, Gisso? It is not important right now. Go see your grandfather. A comforting smile softened his somber face. Grandfather had never allowed me to go into his quarters. Never. What was so special about now? Come in, Malidoma, came the weak voice of grandfather as I kept tapping on his hut. Not knowing what to expect, I stuck just my head in to see this place of mystery. I could see nothing in the darkness. It was as if grandfather were living inside a bottomless pit, so I decided to follow the sound of his voice. As I stood in the blackness wondering what I was doing here, I could smell the many odors of herbs and potions and roots. As my eyes gradually adjusted to the lack of light, I could see many gourds hanging from the ceiling. There seemed to be a small hole in the top of the dome to which all the containers seemed to be tied or connected. It looked like a road map made of rope that led to all the medicines. Come here, Malidoma, came grandfather's voice once again. I could not see where he was, so once again I moved to where I thought the voice was coming from. I stumbled on a rise of dirt and fell into a pile of humanity. It was grandfather, lying on his bed of mud with a sand pillow beneath his head. You have not been here before, have you? No, grandfather, you would not allow me in here. I could now make out his eyes as they stared straight up to the ceiling. His breathing was brief but calm. That is because you were not to see what you now see until you were initiated, or until I was to travel to the other world. There are things that I wish to tell you. Sit closely to me. I scooted as close as I could without taking more space away from an already sparse bed of hardened mud. It was a while until he spoke again. You are Malidoma, befriend with the enemy. You are of the house of Birifer, we who are priests with the other world. I was not prepared for what grandfather had to tell me. I held his hand tightly as he talked on and on about the family history, about the courageous war against the white man, how the upside-down arrow hit its mark at night, killing the enemy without a blow, how the white man's machines won the battles by day, but the dagger won the battles by night, when the arrows of the other world were delivered. He told how the war ended when one of the white priests was seen giving aid to the women of the village who had been hidden from the zone of battle. He spoke with great sadness as he described how dagger law forbade hurting anyone unless they were trying to hurt you. It was not the white man's weapons of destruction that defeated the Daggera. It was his kindness, or so it seemed, the kindness of one man. Malidoma, the time will come when you will be only part Daggera. You will learn the white man's ways. There will be many trials for you. Be strong. Know that you are Birifer. I jumped as I felt another hand touch my shoulder. It was Gisso. Brother, you will be taken from your people and will one day return. After you have learned the secrets of Birifer, you will then surrender once more to the Milky Ones. You will walk with men who live in trees that reach to the sky. You will speak to their hearts, and you will learn their secrets. You will be the bridge across the great sea between our people and their people. Grandfather reached out to grasp Gisso's hand and put it in mine. Gisso, take care of your grandson. I could tell that grandfather was looking at me. Malidoma, listen and watch your brother. Grandfather simply folded his hands on top of his chest and breathed no more. The air seemed to stir with feeling. The gourds hanging from the ceiling began to sway to and fro. Then violently, they began to create a clatter as if applauding the great Bobiro, shaman priest of the Birifer. They continued their applause as Gisso pulled me from the room. The brightness of the sun blinded me as Gisso led me to the center of the compound. He sat on the ground with eyes closed, holding me close to him. Though no grief was shown, he was deeply moved. This would be the eventual resting place of the great Babiro, my brother, grandfather. Is grandfather dead, Gisso? No, brother Malidoma. He lives on in me. How to ritualize life. I am called Malidoma, he who is to be friends with the stranger or enemy. The word Doma is used to refer to both meanings. The idea is that a stranger can become an enemy, and so a stranger is sacred because it is the task of him who is not a stranger to turn the potential enemy in the stranger into a friend. In my many years since the passing of grandfather, I have suffered greatly and learned greatly in the pursuance of what I see as my calling. Today, I wonder whether my life in exile makes me more of a stranger enemy than one who would or should be friend, or should it be the other way round? The quest constantly imposing itself upon me has been more a quest for a home in the hearts of people, a thing that I take as a yardstick by which to measure the level of my own comfort, than a desire to efface myself behind the commonality of mechanistic standardization. And the constant questions ghostly looming in my consciousness are, what can I tell my brothers and sisters across the great sea? How relevant is a small village in the wilds of Western Africa to the hustle and bustle of Western society? The West is crowded with people who want healing. This much I have been able to notice. There are people who know that somewhere deep within is a living being in serious longing for a peaceful and serene life. These are people who are so dissatisfied with the existing system that they will embrace anything that promises to rescue them from a sense of entrapment. Without real ritual, there is only illness. Such illness cannot be healed with pills or drugs or alcohol or shopping at the mall or being tranced out many hours a day in front of the TV screen. I started out in this book with a concern. Where does this trouble in modern people come from? Being modern or Western does not mean being devoid of trouble. I have come to suspect that in the absence of ritual, the soul runs out of its real nourishment, and all kinds of social problems then ensue. I do not want to pretend that I can provide a model for fixing the ills of Western culture. My intentions are much more modest. They are the results of my observations and experiences as a person caught in this culture and alienated by it. From the echoes of my ancestors, I feel I can give some clue as to how to improve that which is in constant decay in this culture. The truth is, I am also trying to make myself feel good by doing that which my own elders commissioned me to do. If my elders have deplored the sweeping effect of modernity, they have also lived in admiration of how effective news from the other world, the primitive world, can help others understand and appreciate themselves better. I suggest that the road to correcting ills goes through the challenging path of ritual. I suggest that ritual not be simply copied from one civilization to another, but simply inspired by some culture still in touch with it. The soul of any man or woman craves for this touchstone to the inner self that puts us back in touch with our primal selves. In Western culture, the closest thing to ritual I have seen is liturgical ceremony, always charged with boredom, and in any case incomplete in what it seeks to accomplish in intimacy with the divine. Ceremony is only a component of ritual. Ritual is not just an elegant procession or music that lifts the soul or words that ordain. To ritualize life, we need to learn how to invoke the spirits or things spiritual into our ceremonies. This means being able to pray out loud, alone. Invocation suggests that we accept the fact that we ourselves don't know how to make things happen the way they should, and thus we seek strength from the spirits or spirit by recognizing and embracing our weakness. This way, before getting started with any aspect of our lives travel, a project, a meeting, we first bring the task at hand to the attention of the gods or God, our allies in the other world. We openly admit to them what we are facing and how overwhelming it is. By ritually putting what we do in the hands of the gods, we make it possible for things to be done better because more than we are involved in its getting done. Also, willingness to surrender the credit of our accomplishments to spirit puts us in greater alignment with the universe. From an Aboriginal point of view, no one can accomplish anything who is not in alignment with the gods or with a god. Anything created without the blessings of the gods or God comes loaded with ills. It does not take much time to send a little invocation at the start and at the end of the day. This way, everything in between is sanctified or sacred and safer because it has been thrown into the hands of the spirit world. A person's life is ritualized who accepts the fact that everything he or she does is the work of the hands of the divine. Everyone can do this. Anyone can, before going out in the morning, send a little prayer to the ancestors on the hills or in the river. It takes a word or two, or at most a few sentences. It is private and effective. Modern communities can benefit from a good sense of ritual if they begin by experimenting with it emotionally. I don't think it is possible to be fully into ritual while one is carrying a load of undelivered emotions. The way you know that your rituals are having a positive effect on you begins with the discovery of how much emotion is pushing you from the inside like a volcano. Those who are able to express their emotions have been, at some point in their lives, in alignment with their own spirits, saints, guides, or guardians. Modernism means unemotionalism, or that which owes emotion to the world. It also means loss of memory of that way of acting that encompasses both the body and the soul. To cleanse the modern world from its unresolved problems of the soul, there ought not to be a memorial day, but a massive funeral day when everyone is expected to shed tears for the titanic loss wreaked by progress on people's souls. I have seen and or participated in some aspects of funerals or burial rites on a minuscule scale in this culture. What I saw was how difficult it is for the modern man to shed tears at length, and how everything that is done to encourage tears degenerates into some kind of strange liturgical solemnity that smells of repression or unwillingness to actually do that which is needed for release of deep grief. I was once part of a grief ritual for Vietnam veterans. I went there bracing myself to face a flood of weeping eyes. A lot of people were there, more than I could count. But instead of an occasion for grieving, it was a ceremony almost similar to that which happens at Arlington Cemetery on Memorial Day. People showed up thinking this was going to be a good idea. They did not come out of a desire to mourn. The setting was beautiful, the lights blinding, the electronic sound system deafening. It felt as if they were an edge of sensationalism or solemnity, but no communal grief. The candle procession that followed on the wet road leading to the wharf was beautiful and elevating, not mournful. I remember seeing a repressed tear here and there and wondering why people behave as if it is illegal to cry their guts out. The grief ritual for Vietnam vets was in its intent a noble initiative that fell short of being able to pull the vets back home. This experience led me to wonder whether it was possible to propose giving a dagger-style funeral. Michael Meade, one of today's leading voices in men's consciousness and awareness, teacher of wisdom, artisan of symbols, metaphors, and myth in the stories of humans, has always been in favor of rituals. He encouraged such a ritual at a men's conference. Of course, a lot of the details in Dagara funerals were dropped due to the impossibility of applying them. Since nobody was supposed to be dead at the conference, death was symbolized. It was an innovation that worked just the same. What happened was that we contented ourselves with dividing the participants into three groups: the containers, the mourners or grievers, and the singers. The zeal with which people involved themselves was baffling. Led by a master drummer, the singers were in ritual preparation long before the actual beginning of the ritual. Over the course of several days, they prayed, rehearsed, and prayed again. The grievers were in real grief long before they got the permission to let loose. For 3 afternoons we gathered, prayed to the waters, the tears of Mother Earth shed, so we might live in her lap. We told each other stories of loss, pain, and frustration. The sincerity of the tellers authorized the grief of the group. Meanwhile, the containers busied themselves like ants, and with unparalleled dedication erected one of the most startling edifices, which was to serve as the shrine and the border between this world and the next. In fact, it was not an expensive-looking shrine, just a creative artifact brought to existence by the dedicated wit of its builders. It looked like an arch, or a dome with half of its size being an opening delineating this world and the next. It was made with the elements of nature: dry wood, leaves, grass. There was at the door a little space where, later on, people brought bundles symbolizing their losses. A few feet from it was a line separating the tribe of men from the other world. 20 feet away, there was a space specifically designated as the village where the grief was supposed to be held. The space in between constituted the road of grief, the place of chaos and commotion. It was made clear that anyone charged with grief should pull away from the village and carry his grief to the threshold and throw it in there, then come back to the village. People had the option to rush to the shrine, walk there, or dance their way to it. The speed was a function of the emotional intensity. They were to be assisted by others who were instructed to stop them gently as they reached the line, wait for them to drop their grief into the other world, then return to the village together. Every expression of emotion was supposed to be done facing the shrine. When the ritual actually began, there was genuineness everywhere. The genuineness quickly translated into an appalling chaos everywhere. First, there were more mourners than helpers. Loads of them packed themselves up at the shrine. Fascinated by the sight of the other world, they were unwilling to return to the village. Worse, some of them, mesmerized by the beyond, wanted to throw themselves into it, as if in serious need to join the dead. Second, it was impossible to trust that the line of demarcation was going to be observed. The pull of the other world was powerfully visible. The interdiction to cross the line was enforced by guards. They used their fists at times to bounce contorted, grieving bodies back to the village. Some people who were asked to return to the village felt hurt. They thought it meant that once again, it was not okay to grieve, so they turned around and mourned their way back to the village. I was appalled. Normally, from an indigenous point of view, if you want to know where a funeral shrine is, follow a griever. This time it did not work. How did it happen that the village was turned into a shrine? The implications were so heavy, I could barely believe my eyes. Michael and I ran everywhere, like men from the fire department battling a blaze. Someone had to explain in gentle terms to these sincere people the need to avoid throwing their grief at the living. Meanwhile, grievers, torn by a flood of unleashed grief and mortally attracted by the beyond, symbolized by the shrine, attacked the guards who were posted at the threshold to prevent them from jumping into the great beyond. They could not resist the pull from the beyond. Honest, screaming souls leapt toward the shrine they had become the bundle. They were recuperated by strong hands and sent back to the village side. As if feeling defied, they gathered their forces together and leapt back only to find themselves reminded in an equal way that they did not belong to the other world yet. and that the village needed them. Other grievers were angry. They ejaculated some insanities at the shrine, screaming at the tops of their voices and ending with a torrential weeping that would break the heart of the toughest CEO. It was no longer a dagger grief ritual, but a ritual period. People leapt out of the village in single line and danced their way to the shrine, turned around and came back home to the village. It was beautiful to see. The space between the village and the shrine was busy. The cleansing was happening. So much grief surfaced that the shrine was jam-packed with a crowd of men who did not quite register that they were only supposed to go to the shrine and drop their grief and return to the village where the drumming and the chanting was going on. The container's job had to be edited a little bit to clean it of its therapist-like influence. Besides these little cultural infiltrations, it was a small success. I saw hot tears flowing from wet eyes. That felt good. I heard sincere groans and yells and screams that almost made me feel like I was home again. The ritual was working. Even though it was just scratching the surface, the scratch was at least opening something. In a way, there was an invitation to unleash grief. The experience left people empty, light, and above all miraculously prone to celebrate. I understood why, in the village, life rotates around grief and celebration. People celebrate because they have paid their dues to the dead. The other side of real grief is real joy. Unfinished grief translates into petty joy and silly amusement. The experience taught me a great deal. Without ritual, humans live in nostalgia. When there is an opportunity for people to mourn their losses, the horizon for rites that heal will be pure and bright, and healing will come pouring into the souls in a great moment of reunion. Can I impart to the modern world that which is rooted in the ancestral world? Only time will tell. I offer the tales of Grandfather and Gisso to serve as a testament to what rests in the Aboriginal soul. Are we not of a common soul as proposed by modern thinkers such as Jung? If so, then what serves the soul of the Daigara may well prove to resonate in the soul of modern peoples also. And so I offer the prayer to our common ancestors on behalf of those seeking to recover themselves from the rubble of modernity as they seek to work their way toward being elders of the new postmodern tribal order. May the spirits of every pertinent direction take notice of their heart's desire. May the forces below pump strength into their feet that they walk the walk of their life, the walk that heals the wounded truth of their bellies and keeps the eyes of their memory open so they can grow Nyang Maru. May the ancestral fuel burn in their spiritual veins and animate their souls with vision so they can hold hands Nyang Maru as they walk toward their future. May they wake up fast to the dialogue between the soul and the spirit, and may they labor to clean the world from its paralyzing epidemic of soul barrenness, so that tomorrow our children can sing together in peace. Acknowledgements. I give thanks to my own ancestors and to Grandfather Bakie, who has maintained a stubborn, energetic presence around me, my psyche, and my consciousness. He has been persistently injecting me with words, the utterances of which have been very frightening to me, but nonetheless have had tremendous impact on the audiences that have heard them. I am grateful to the Council of Initiation that ultimately made the decision to initiate me into becoming the kind of person I am. To all the people of my tribe, I am thankful whether they know me or not. It doesn't matter. For some reason, the more I talk about them, the more I believe in them, the more I can associate with them. I am grateful to my father for silently being the kind of support that I always find whenever I am unsure about where to go or what to do. To all the men who have supported me spontaneously and equally with their trust and belief in the making of the very ritual I describe in this book, I am truly indebted. Without them, I would have never known that there is way for one culture to relate to another culture. I am grateful to Michael Meade for being the other tribal African man in a white skin who through his actions and unspoken words unmistakably has guided me, encouraged me, and showed me the way to reach out to men in this frightening white world. To Robert Bly for being, in many ways, the kind of grandfather that I used to feel comfortable coming close to when I was a child, I honor with admiration and gratefulness. Robert Moore, who appears to my eyes to be in this culture a man of great spirit, a Babiro indeed, I embrace with gratitude. To John Lee for the good things he says to me, and for having acknowledged and confirmed for me thoughts and feelings I was timid or hesitant in conveying things he suggested or triggered in my own mind by his remarks, I express my thanks. To James Hillman for his encouragement and support, I express my appreciation. It is his vision and determination that have helped me to move with greater ease within American culture. He has become for me a psychological touchstone to this rapidly changing modern world. I am grateful again to all the people whom I don't know, who through their very explicit interest in who I am and what I am doing in this country, eventually encouraged me to go ahead and venture into this kind of written disclosure. To them I owe this book and more. A Ritual Sampler, The Funeral and the Language of Grief. It was late in the afternoon when I first heard the sound. It was a shrieking guttural wail that shot out of several throats almost at the same time. It was echoed by other sounds in the near distance. The quiet of the village was lost in a matter of seconds. The voices were so sharp anyone would think they come from spirits lost in the human realm. I knew that something was wrong, but I could not tell what. A nearly 3-year-old child wonders about everything associated with death. Grandfather would surely know about this. The last time this happened, it was because someone had seen something terrible. Grandfather, grandfather, I called, breathless from my swift run to his hut. There are spirits singing in the village. Something is going to happen. What is it? Those are not spirits, Brother Malidoma. Those are the women of the village who are mourning your stepbrother's death. They are announcing to the rest of the village to prepare themselves for the grief ritual. How come you aren't making that sound, grandfather? He smiled with a grin that betrayed his wisdom. Only the women show such grief at this time. I must make ready for the ritual, and you must go, for I have much to do. The sacred space must be prepared. Your stepbrother must be sent to the place of the ancestors, and we must help him. Now go with your questions. Your father will bring you to the sacred space later. You can watch and learn. I will answer your questions later. Go now. I pretended to head back to my father's house, but instead hid behind a wall where I could see inside grandfather's quarters. Whenever grandfather had to be alone, I knew something magical was about to happen. It wasn't very long before I saw him gather some of his things, among them the pouch that usually contained ashes. He quietly left, and I knew I had to follow. Grandfather has eyes in the back of his head, so I knew that he must be in deep thought not to see me following behind him. I tiptoed from house to house until I saw grandfather arrive at what is called the ritual lodge. Other elders of the village were arriving also. They sat in a circle with grandfather. Kiso, the special one grandfather infrequently spoke of, also joined the circle. He was a little younger than grandfather. They were quiet for a very long time. I began to turn a beetle over with my toe, watching with childlike curiosity how it was able to right itself. After the third overturning, my game was interrupted by a strange chant coming from the lodge. The elders had their arms raised up as if inviting guests in from the sky. With strained ears, I could make out names of different spirits that they were asking to come and help. As the sound grew louder, I grew more uneasy. The air around me felt alive, as if invisible fingers were gently coaxing me to go. And go I did. There was a time to be curious and a time to be smart. This was a time not to be too curious. I was to find out later that this was the beginning ceremony of the invocation of the spirits. Father, why is grandfather in the ritual lodge? Father said nothing. He seemed caught up in thought himself. Or was it grief? He seemed upset with himself, as if he might be responsible for my stepbrother's death. How curious all of this was. The whole village was transforming before my very eyes. The wailing of the women could now be heard everywhere. It gave me goosebumps. Several elders entered our house at that moment, saying not a word. Father grabbed me, pulling me out of the way. They marched like silent warriors. Grandfather, I called out, but not even his eyes moved. They all tromped into the room where my stepbrother had died. I wiggled, trying to get free, but father would not let go. Straining to see the action in the sleeping room, I watched grandfather throwing white ash into the air. The chanting continued. This time every word was loud and clear enough to start goosebumps again. Every conceivable good spirit was being called. One of the living just drew his last breath. His soul just left. Come, come to help us. Come, come to show my grandson the way to the realm of the ancestors. White ash was filling the air in the room. The chanting continued with its weaving and echoing of the sound of men. Outside, the wailing was coming closer, and all the sound began to flood the house of death. I looked through the door to see Gisso slowly circling the house. He was carefully laying down ash, the same kind of ash that grandfather had been throwing in the air. With only his eyes moving, Gisso gave me a curious look. I raised my hand in greeting. He said nothing, but I could see his lips pursing back a grin. Father, why are they putting ash around our house? He bent down and whispered in my ear. It is to keep any more evil from coming upon us. Vulture spirits sometimes are attracted to deaths like this and try to see if they can cause even more trouble. Vulture spirits? I had never seen one. I wanted to run to Gisso and ask him if he had ever seen a vulture spirit. Emotion was taking the village hostage. Emotion was transforming even the air with its sound, its sights, ash and chant, wailing and waving of arms and the invoking of spirits. Never will I forget this first encounter with the mystery of grief. A non-Westerner arriving in this country for the first time is struck by how little attention is given to human emotion in general. People appear to pride themselves for not showing how they feel about anything. A husband might lose his job, yet deploy tremendous effort to show some modicum of indifference. A couple has a crisis in relationship, yet unless seen together, it is impossible to tell what turmoil they hide inside. And the worst case of all is witnessed when someone dies. It took me the longest time to figure out that a long line of cars with headlights on in the middle of the day meant someone had died. As attractive as the modern world is with its material abundance, it is repulsive with its spiritual and emotional poverty. What overflows in the West is barren in the indigenous world, and vice versa. Among the things that the indigenous world can share from its abundance with the modern world are spirit and emotion. There are countless ways of expressing emotion because countless ways are needed. No one is supposed to repress emotion. If death disturbs the living, it offers a unique opportunity to unleash one of the strongest emotional powers humans have, the power to grieve. Yet, anyone who has had an opportunity to participate in a grief ritual in another culture would be shocked by the effort deployed by people in this culture to prevent themselves from feeling anything when someone dies. It is as if death had intruded into forbidden territory of the heart, trying to steal away with some kind of emotion against people's wills. People die in newspapers and television reports. People die on bulletin boards, but they are rarely shown dead. To an indigenous person, showing a picture of a person alive and saying that this person is dead is anachronistic. Why hide death? People who do not know how to weep together are people who cannot laugh together. People who know not the power of shedding their tears together are like a time bomb, dangerous to themselves and to the world around them. The dagger understand the expression of emotion as a process of self-rekindling or calming, which not only helps in handling death, but also resets or repairs the feelings within the person. This is needed because death and the sudden separation around it puts the living in a state of emotional debt, loss, and disorientation. The unresolved energy produced by the death of a loved one translates itself emotionally as grief, and grief is in fact owed to the dead as the only ingredient that can help complete the death process. Grief delivers to the dead that which they need to travel to the realm of the dead, a release of emotional energy that also provides a sense of completion or endedness, closure. This sense of closure is also needed by the griever who has to let go of the person who has died. We have to grieve. It is a duty like any other duty in life. For the Daggera, grief is seen as food for the psyche. Just as the body needs food, the psyche needs grief to maintain its own healthy balance. As a result, one of the most sophisticated rituals designed by the Daggera for its own people is the funeral ritual. The Daggera feel this ritual, which involves everybody both living and dead, is owed to the dead, whether they die young or old. This ritual gives our people the opportunity to grieve individually and communally. I would like, by way of example, to describe the process of this communal expression of grief as it is experienced among the Daggera of Burkina Faso. I would also like to describe grief and its expression within a ritual context. Grief is an aspect of the Daggera social life, and death is where it is chiefly expressed. Death is not seen as an ending, but rather as an opportunity for a person to take off these ragged clothes we call a body and walk naked. Even though this is a view commonly held by the Daggera, death still produces a kind of sudden vacuum and loss of attachment that requires grief in order to heal. Without grief, the separation between the living and the dead never actually shifts into that stage in which the living accept the fact that a loved one has become a spirit. The departed loved one, consequently, never arrives where death commands him or her to go, and therefore becomes angry with the living. If there is no expression of grief, it will affect the dead and the living detrimentally. The dead cannot then go free from their earthly consciousness. As the deceased takes on spirit essence, he or she may get snagged into thinking of himself or herself still as a person. Thus, the deceased may begin to intrude into the business of the living in a way that can constitute a serious nuisance. I remember once looking for an apartment in town where I was a student. The rental office lady took me to a nice-looking efficiency apartment on the second floor of a building. As soon as we entered the place, I was frozen by a dismal sight. There at the kitchen sink stood a girl in her 20s with a kitchen knife two-thirds into her chest. She was bleeding profusely with her white robe soaked in blood down to her feet. It took me a second to realize that she was the ghost of a person who had been dead for quite a while. My reaction startled the housing person who was showing me the place. Of course, she saw nothing. She asked if there was something I did not like about the place. I said yes. She asked what. I could not tell her what I saw. I said it was a vague feeling that I should look somewhere else. This is what happens when a dead person is not grieved. It takes a living person to shed tears on behalf of a dead person for this kind of thing not to happen. Humans must feel grief and be able to express it sincerely in order to free the dead spirit. In the village, there is an opportunity to grieve daily because there is death almost every day. And funeral rituals last long enough to produce a continual opportunity for the expression of grief. It takes a great deal of involvement within a community for grief to be expressed freely. It is the presence of the community that validates the expression of grief. This means that a singular expression of grief is an incomplete expression of grief. A communal expression of grief has the power to send the deceased to the realm of the ancestors, and to heal the hurt produced in the psyches of the living by the death of a loved one. The ghost I saw in that apartment was perhaps grieved for only a few hours, maybe less, and by a few people only. Those who came to support the family in grief were probably trying their best to make sure that the members of the family did not shed too many tears. They were preventing grief from happening rather than encouraging it. They themselves were without tears, and so the poor deceased girl never went away. Tears carry the dead home. Communal grief, therefore, provides the opportunity to reach that important cathartic peak that grief must logically lead to, as well as serve as an energy that transports the dead home. Grief is an energy that works at mellowing the mind, heart, and body. An agitated or prolonged expression of grief exhausts the body to the point where rest is needed. One notices that a baby sometimes cries heavily before going to sleep. Grief takes us to the top of the hill and then lets us walk back down slowly, peacefully. It helps relieve the person who is in sorrow and leads him or her toward acceptance of the phenomenon of death, separation, and love. Funeral rites in a Dagara village usually start shortly after the death. The first people to cry out loud are the women. By wailing, they are not ritually involved, but are merely sending the news to the nearby villages about what has happened. While women are wailing, men are performing the invocational ritual that will make it possible for the funeral to proceed out into the open air for the next 2 or 3 days, depending on who dies. To hear women cry means that someone just died. The reason that men don't cry is because they must create the ritual space for the funeral to begin. Their ritual sets the space for the communal expression of grief. The elders gather in the ritual lodge to tell the ancestors that one of the living just departed, that he will soon be on his way to their ancestral realm, and that the villagers will need all their help to make that happen. Every conceivable good spirit must be evoked to make certain that the deceased properly journey to the realm of the ancestors. No one wants to be responsible for having the deceased not reach the realm of the dead, for the responsible person may die to join with the one who cannot find his way. 12 years ago, I lost one of my best friends this way. His departed father, who had died in his hands but a few weeks earlier, had come back to get my friend because his mother would not allow the rite of the dead to be performed. She was Catholic. The priest had told her the rite was Satanism. Her son died suddenly in the city, hit by a car that disappeared before anyone could read the license plate. Back in the village, the diviner found out that the father of the newly deceased son had been sitting at the gate of the realm of the ancestors for a long time, waiting for the final ritual that would have thrown the gate open. In total despair, he had come seeking the most spectacular way to alert the family to the difficulty he was facing. A spirit who cannot find his way to the realm of the dead is dangerous to the living. Thank you for tuning in. Stay tuned for more chapters coming soon. Peace, blessings, and much love to you all. On Earth, there was once a people who held the knowledge of the universe across space and time. They were the Israelites. Over time, their wisdom was scattered among all nations, with each taking a piece. In the end, this left them destitute. Now, listen to this profound wisdom passed down through great works, presented in your voice, from your own perspective, from the perspective of the Israelites themselves. For early access to chapters and full audiobooks, consider becoming a member. For just $10 per month, you can unlock exclusive access to this priceless wisdom, once stolen from our ancestors. Hear their voices through your own as you join us on this journey of discovery and reclamation.